Good afternoon, everyone. It is nice to see you today, people here at BLC and also online. So my name is Monica Incerite from Kaunas 2022, European Capital of Culture. We are happy to host this month Contemporary Ukrainian Art Triennale, Ukraine Unmuted. And today we have a first discussion which follows the triennale program. So we have guests and the moderator Oksana Forostina, for which I would like to give a floor and to encourage you to participate in this discussion as well.
Thank you, Monica, and thank you for being such a nice host for all of us. Not only our guest tomorrows, but the whole thing, which is the fifth biennial of Ukrainian contemporary art. This year in Kaunas, as Kaunas is European capital of culture this year, and I think that's quite a symbolic coincidence that such a good friends of Ukraine as Lithuania is hosting the European Capital of Culture this year. We are very nice to be here, and for everyone who is in Kaunas these days, I very much encourage you to visit the Ukrainian exhibition in the Kaunas post office. It was opened just recently, just a few days ago, and it will last till the beginning of December. So might any one of you online or here in Kaunas, please visit. And this year, this triennial is very special, as which is understandable. It's not only art, but it's also discussions. Actually, our discussion is the first one, kind of introduction. We will have 4 of them during November. And we will also have a book of essays on Ukrainian culture in English and in Lithuanian. It's coming. It will be soon. And today I'm also very grateful to our speakers, to our guests. With our first topic, discovering Ukraine. It's not original, but I hope that the discussions, the talk will bring a lot of new things to you. We bring you here Vachtan Kubuladze from Kiev. He is a prominent Kiev philosopher, writer, and translator. And Henrik Fredriksson came from Vienna. He is also a translator, again, one common thing. And he's also an editor, a co-founder of the European network of cultural magazines, Eurozine. We will talk about this later. And I will be very happy to encourage both of you to tell more about yourself, which I usually don't do, but this time again it's very special. I think for our topic, it's important to explain where are you guys are coming from, and my first question will be your kind of introduction to Ukraine, your personal story. Karl-Henrik, I think we will start with you to give the context. So please, the floor is yours. And again, many thanks.
Thank you, Oksana, and thank you for inviting me to Kaunas. So I'm a Swede. I'm living in Vienna, but I am a Swede. And as a Swede, growing up in a so-called neutral country, Sweden has now received a lot of attention for having applied together with Finland to join the NATO. But Sweden was actually never a neutral country. In our legislation, it says that Sweden is non-aligned in peacetime, aiming for neutrality in case of war. And as a Swede growing up in this non-allied country, I was, so to say, breastfed with the view of myself and my country representing a third alternative between two evils. On the one hand, untamed capitalism, represented by Washington, and communist dictatorship, represented by Moscow. And Sweden represented this third view, especially via our prime minister back then, Olof Palme. And Olof Palme could stand up in the Swedish parliament or on a demonstration on the street or in a talk in radio and point the finger to Washington, saying that the bombings of Hanoi is like Katyn or other atrocities of throughout history. You bloody murderers, he points to Washington. Or he could go walk the streets or stand up in parliament or talk in the media and point the finger to Moscow. For example, in 1968, when he calls the Husak regime the creatures of dictatorship. This was not neutrality in any of these cases. It was a non-aligned position that made it possible to take a stance like that. For example, it led to Sweden not having any diplomatic relations with the United States for years. Very few people remember this today, but that was the case. The US withdrew its ambassador from Sweden. And then comes 1989, 1991. And we, I speak collectively, even though we, of course, we all, including myself, have very different views on this, expected our compatriots in Eastern Europe, in the former Soviet Union, but also in the satellite states in Eastern Europe, to be just like us, to come to us and join this third position between these two evils. And what instead happened, to a large extent, was that many this part of the world ran straight into the arms of the other evil, namely to the United States, which resulted in an attitude from where I come from, not least in the political left, of skepticism towards this part of the world, towards Eastern Europe. This has slowly changed, and today the view is a very different one. But one cannot forget this recent history to try to explain some kind of views and opinions and also political takes and stances on Eastern Europe from the point of view of this. I will not go into more detail about this geopolitical position now of Sweden and so on. Sweden's relationship, however, to Ukraine have another history as well. And now I will try to, so to say, mix this general history with my own personal history. Back in 2013, I was invited by Oksana and Wojciech Przybylski to Kiev for a meeting of let's call it intellectuals. And I had given some speech there, and then we went to a restaurant in the evening. It was my first visit to Kiev, and we went to a restaurant, and some guys who have been at this event followed us there. They were not part of the organization or so, but they were sitting at the table next to ours. They were looking very angry at me all the evening. And at some point I had to ask them, why? Why are you looking so angry at me? Well, you're a Swede, right? And as a Swede, you're normally uh, you're expecting to be treated like the harmless, little bit naive person that have no stakes in geopolitics or whatever. But they were, you're a Swede, right? Yeah, I'm a Swede. Remember Poltava? And then they explained to me that if we, the Swedes, wouldn't have lost the Battle of Poltava, 1709, Ukraine would not have been in the sphere of influence of Moscow and Russia, but of Sweden. And all that historical guilt was, so to say, projected on me. We would just have been better warriors, a bit braver, standing up to Peter the Great. Things would have been different. I'm noticing now that this is getting long, and perhaps I can get a second part of explaining my relationship to Ukraine, because this is when it's then starting. This meeting in Kiev was in October 2013, I think, just a few weeks before Euromaidan starts, and just a few weeks before the 30th of November, when the first Berkut police are so to say, attacking not only demonstrators but also peaceful people on the street. And at that time, I was again together with Oksana actually at a conference in Oslo, in this network where I've been working for decades to try to increase the cultural exchange between East and West, between North and South in Europe. And because I had been to Kiev, I could then, I saw the issue that was at stake, and we could very quickly start to inform the delegates of this conference, Oksana, but also Mykola Ryabchuk or Katya Mishenko, who was there at that time, could establish these personal contacts to this intellectual community that I have to perhaps a little bit pathetically phrase it like that, changed the way one part of the intellectual community perceived what happened in Ukraine. There's so many more things I would like to say about my personal way into Ukraine, but I'm taking too long.
I would later also ask you about another interesting story, and it will be more broader, not only about Ukraine but about our part of the world. And speaking of our part of the world in general, there are different definition and different perception. One of the idea is Central Europe. Another idea, maybe not so fancy, is Eastern Europe. And there is also a term we Ukrainians particularly don't like, which is post-Soviet countries and so forth. But we also must admit that we ourselves use this post-Soviet idea for some time. And I would ask now Vakhtang to tell his story. Vakhtang is a Kiev boy. He grew up in Kiev. He's Ukrainian, but as for many Ukrainians, the idea of what our country is not some banal knowledge, but also a part of intellectual biography. And I would ask Vakhtang to tell a bit about that.
Thank you, Oksana, and I'm very grateful for this invitation. And it's my pleasure to be here in Kaunas. Kaunas is a very amazing city now, like a big installation. It's a real capital, cultural capital of Europe. And by the way, it's my first travel abroad after the Russian invasion this year. And it's very strange for me because Normally, I travel a lot, and this is also a great value for us, the freedom of movement and freedom of travel, and this is one of the main value and main freedom of the free world. About my own history, about my own experience, yeah, I was born in Kiev, and it is strange to say that I was born on the territory of modern Ukraine, but at the same time, it wasn't Ukraine. It was the Soviet Union. It was another country. It was another state. It was another political culture. It was another type of life, I would say. And for me, it was a very traumatic experience. I wrote about this experience in my essay, Gaining in Motherland. Yeah, and I think that the title of this essay, it's very important for us now, because Oksana said that for us, Ukraine is not something that was given for granted for us. Yeah. So I was born in Ukraine, but at the same time, it wasn't Ukraine. It was colony of Soviet Union, and we see now that it was colony of Russia. And as I wrote in this essay, at the beginning of this essay, that it's a traumatic experience to hate the motherland. Yeah? And I hated Soviet Union. For me, Soviet Union was a prison. It wasn't a normal life. Yeah? And I think for me, the Western people, for example, in Sweden, are just a little bit naive, because for me it wasn't. It were not two type of evil. I know that evil is here in Soviet Union, and we have another type of life. The name of this type of life is free world. Yeah, it's very different, and not only Sweden and USA, Spain and Germany also. Yeah, but probably it's one space, one type of life with different cultural references. Yeah, okay, but the main dimension of this life is freedom. And that's why, for me, as I said, the life in Soviet Union was terrible. And I wrote in these essays about my experience. I was 14 years old. I came to the mirror in the apartment of my parents in Kiev, in the center of Kiev, my native city, and I like it, I love it. But I came to the mirror, looked at myself, and said to myself, you will never leave the confines of this prison. Obviously, I didn't mean the apartment of my parents. The prison for me was Soviet Union. That's why this year, 1991, it was the year for me and for my friends, for my relatives, it was the year of absolutely happiness, because this prison was destroyed. Yeah? But it's a pity that after that, the life in the post-Soviet space and in Ukraine as well wasn't the type of life of our dreams, yeah, so to speak. Because until now we have in our society many features of this post-Soviet, post-totalitarian society. And for me, at the beginning of independence, at the end of the 20th century, it wasn't the new story. It was a story about post-Soviet space with all terrible features of this post-Soviet state, and I thought that I wanted to live in the free world. But it was a great question for us, for all of us. Is it possible in Ukraine? Is it possible in this post-Soviet space? And for me, all features of the Soviet reality were the features of enemy, of evil. But I think that I changed my attitude at the beginning of this century, and the very important event for me was our first Maidan, our first revolution, we can say. Because after that, I understood that my enemy and this type of evil was not only the Soviet Union, this type of state, this state, it was Russia. Because Soviet Union, it's only very short part of the history of the whole Russia, and this history is the history of terrible state without freedom of thought, without freedom of movement, without any kind of freedoms. Yeah.
And the first Maidan, I think we should mention that for our audience. The first Maidan, you mean, was in 2004.
2004, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And in 2005, I wrote the article about Russia history, and about Russia philosophy, about the history of Russian philosophy, about the history of Russian religion, about the deep historical roots of this type of state. And for me, it was the documentation of my own experience. Yeah. You can read these essays in my book, and the name of these essays is Eternal City, Victim and Empire. Eternal City is Moscow. Yeah. So after that, and until now, I understand that my enemy, it's not Soviet Union. My enemy is Russia, and it's terrible to say, and it's very hard to say, but this war and this invasion wasn't a surprise for me. Yeah, I was waiting and for that, and I understood after the first Maidan, after 2004, 2005, that these two types of life, the type of life of free people and the type of life in Russia, not only in Soviet Union, but in modern Russian, it's a big conflict. Yeah? And that's why it's not a surprise. It's a terrible experience. It's this modern experience of this new war. It's terrible, but as I said, it's not a surprise for me.
Thank you, and I will come back to Karl Henrik now, and come back to this to the term post-Soviet countries, and it's maybe at some point these post-Soviet countries was not just a term which we again I say we don't find a good one for the reality, but at some point that was a reality, and as far as I understand, that was when you first encountered it. I mean these post-Soviet countries, and I would like you to tell about again the context, your work back then. I mean in Eurozine, and this first contact, and how was it for you back then?
So Eurozine is a network of intellectual and cultural publications, of journals, and it was it's based on an informal network of editors that has been going on since the beginning of the 1980s, comprising Western European editors. It was kind of initiated by a German radio journalist, so on. And the longer this went on, the clearer it of course became that there was something missing here. There was a void in this network, and we didn't identify that as Soviet space, but we identified it as Eastern Europe. And there were then attempts before '89 to start to invite editors from the other side of the divide. And it didn't really work out very well because the problems that the editors on that other side of the divide were facing were completely different ones than the ones, or to a large extent, different ones than the ones occupying the editors in the West. While the West was discussing, you know, the first instances of digitalization or the changes in the media climate and whatever. There's this famous letter coming from an editor in Hungary who is saying, answering to the question, okay, what is a good relationship to a writer from an editorial point of view? That's one of the questions that will be discussed at one of these meetings. And he's saying, well, the relationship I have with my many of my writers is that I get an envelope put in under the doorway. I never meet them. I don't see them because that's too dangerous. Or when the means of productions are being discussed in the West, is saying, well, my main concern is how I should get the permission to get paper, or how I can get paper to print my journal. So there was this divide. However, it was clear that that divide needed to be bridged. And from some people, Vienna is not unimportant with its symbolical geographical place there, and very quickly we, after before and after '89, we managed to integrate many intellectual publications in these countries, including Russia. As a Kritika, for example, in Ukraine. In Russia, we had journals like Kosnovinitsa Pass or New Literary Review. And very quickly, the relationship was 50-50. So it was a truly European network as an Eastern, Western partner journals. However, that of course didn't mean that the divide had disappeared. The problems were still rather different in these different parts of the world. It was a constant work of creating understanding in the West for, I mean, I don't know if you remember the days back then, but there was a compact uninterest in anything Eastern European among intellectuals in Western Europe, in France, in Germany. It's a compact disinterest, unless it wasn't a hot conflict. There was, unfortunately, I don't remember her name now, but a prominent playwright from ex-Yugoslavia who is having, she's fleeing the war, and she's having a residency in I think in Vienna, and she's writing for a prominent theater magazine. She gets the offer to write a column. In her third column, already, when she gets this, she starts to say, frankly, I don't know what to write. How should I write anything when I know that you're not interested really in my writing, but you're interested in me as a writer in war? And that is, so to say, the interest. And this is it's of course fantastic that Ukrainian culture is now that Shadan can receive the Peace Prize of the German book trade, for example, or that Andrei Kurkov can tour Europe with his books and so on and so forth. But it's a sign of a lack that was there before. As we sit here and speak now, there's a debate going on in Swedish newspapers about the latest book of Shadan that has been published outside of Ukraine, which is called Himmel über Kharkiv, which is a diary of his life there. So it's it's published in German by Surkamp and has this reference to the Wim Wenders film, of course, and the heaven and all that. This was being reviewed in a Swedish newspaper, and one of the main points in that review was that hardly anything of this writer is translated into Swedish before. And now, of course, there are lots of things coming. There are book after book after book coming out. And I want to come back to that later. Who is reacting to what has happened in Ukraine in society? But that is a kind of a tragic success of now in this hot war. There is this interest, right, for thought and writing and cultural production, for example, or now in Ukraine. But where was that interest really before?
But I know you personally, you had this interest. Yeah, and that's why I will not let you go now. And my next question is, how can you switch from being a newcomer to the issue, to this course, and became someone who also explain Ukraine and other countries of Central Europe, of Eastern Europe, to your colleagues in the West, in Sweden, in Austria, in France, whatever?
I'm a little bit of a special case, and therefore I think a good example of how this could be, because I don't speak or read any Slavic language. And I'm always a little bit of a strange guy when people engaging, for example, for the Ukrainian cause, gathers or interested in Eastern European literature. So, but there are people like me out there, and the only reason that we exist is that there is a constant infrastructurally based work of creating networks, personal networks. That meeting in Kiev in October 2013 was, so to say, the starting point for me. And I couldn't let go then. I went to the 10th anniversary of the first Maidan was coming up. And I wanted to, of course, I'm not an uninterested person, so I wanted to go to the square and see, okay, how was it? Because how was it? And I realized, okay, they had built this it was no longer a flat surface, but so that people shouldn't gather, and I could see it, and then I could tell these things, right? And then I'm getting more and more involved, I'm creating more and more personal contacts, and then I sit on a place where I can, give space to this thing, have texts from Kritika, translate, also not only me mediating it, but have text from Kritika translated into readable language, so that people that don't read Ukrainian or have any Slavic interest can get this this view. Then I end up sitting in spring, in February of 2014, like 24 hours a day, watching Espresso TV or Romatsky TV, even though I don't understand a word of what is being said, because I can't go. And that is based on the personal encounters that was made. And let me give you another example that takes it away a little bit from me. Amnesty's reaction to Russia's war on Ukraine. They reacted extremely late, and they got it completely wrong. And it's one example of a humanitarian organization. Cultural organizations, such like for example, PEN, International PEN, reacted much quicker and got it right Uh, Again, the Swedish example. Swedish pen, when the Belarusian revolution happened, immediately reacted, started to translate, published an anthology. There were papers every day in the newspapers by Belarusian intellectuals, because there were these people in Sweden who could, this one is good, or there was the personal contact, can't you write, and so on. With Ukraine, exactly the same. And as the example Shadan showed, there are lots of translations of Russian literature into Swedish. Sweden is one of the most fantastic languages to know if you want to read Russian and don't read Russian. There are enormous amounts of translated literature, hardly anything Ukrainian. But because, for example, a cultural attaché based in Moscow at the embassy created networks, invited Swedish writers, not only to talk to Russians, but to go to Kiev, to go to Minsk, and have these meetings there and create this personal relationship. And that is then the basis for an organization like PEN to be able to react quickly, strongly, and to get it right, and not like, for example, Amnesty.
Vatank, as many Ukrainians, writers, editors, translators, you have a kind of a second job, and that's not only during the war right now, not only since February, but I think many years before. You're one of those who explain Ukraine to your friends in Germany, in Spain, in other countries. How was your actually how was your experience back in 2004 when you changed this perspective, and what did you learn since then? Because now you do it also on kind of professional level. With Volodymyr.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the question. It's absolutely so. Yeah, it's our task. So it's our commitment to explain Ukraine, to tell about Ukraine. And at the beginning of this century, I thought that my task was to tell the Ukrainian people about the world, to tell the students about the German philosophy, about the European culture and American culture, etc. But now I understand that we have another very important task, the Ukrainian intellectuals. We should tell the world about Ukraine. How to do it? It's a great problem, and that's a big question for us, because it's sometimes it's very complicated to communicate our point of view to German people or to European people at all, or to the people from United States, and we should find the appropriate vocabulary for that. We should find the real points, and we should find the language. I mean, it's not mean English or German language, but this very important formulations, and it's a really a big problem for us. Yeah. So what should we do? First of all, we should destroy the Russian narration. Yeah? And we are the expert in this field. So, for example, I understand Russian language. It's also my native language, and I understand Russian language, and I understand Russian literature, Russian history very well. That's why I can be expert in this field, not only for Ukraine, but for whole Europe and for whole modern world. So we should, as I said, we should destroyed the Russian narration, and not only the political narration, because the political narrations, Russian narrations, are deeply rooted in Russian culture, so-called culture, in Russian literature, yeah, in Russian history, in Russian type of Orthodox religion. And for example, we should explain that today our fight, we fight not only for territory and for the life of our people. It's very important for us, yeah. But we are fighting for our type of life. We are fighting for our values. That's why, for example, the name of our second revolution, yeah, was revolution of dignity, because dignity, it's another one very important value for the whole free world, freedom and dignity. Yeah, and it's very important to explain that we cannot be free among the slaves. Yeah, we cannot have dignity among the people who don't have any kind of dignity. That's why we are fighting for dignity and freedom at the same time, and we are fighting not only for the freedom and dignity of Ukrainian people, but we are fighting for the freedom and dignity of the whole free world. With Russia, against Russia, and we should show that this type of life, the Russian type of life, without freedom, without dignity, without human rights, is deeply rooted in the Russian literature. For example, and I quote the idea of Tatiana Agarkova, that one of the main feature of Russian culture can be called crime without punishment. Yeah, we can reformulate the title of this novel by Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment, in this way. Because the big dream of Russian society is called crime without punishment. It's also the type of freedom. Yeah, I can do anything without punishment. Yeah, but it's another type of freedom, that it's not a freedom of the real free people, of the people who have dignity. It's a very dangerous type of freedom. We call it negative freedom. Yeah, and so we can show in this way that the crimes of Russian soldiers are rooted in the Russian literature, in Dostoevsky, yeah, for example. It's one part of our task. Another one is to tell our own narration, not only to destroy the Russian narration, but to tell our own Ukrainian narration. And not only we philosophers and writers should do it, but also artists, yeah, filmmakers, and other people who are working on the field of culture. And for example, I have this T-shirt on me from Odessa, and here is a painting of my friend, modern Ukrainian artist. It's a pity he died last year, 2 years ago, Alexander Royburt. And you can see the title of this painting, David with the head of Goliath. It's a plot of Caravaggio, yeah, but the style of painting is style of Kazimir Malevich, famous Ukrainian, famous painter from Ukraine. Yeah, so it's like an illustration how we should do it. We should show that on the one hand, modern Ukrainian culture, modern Ukrainian arts, and modern Ukrainian type of life, our political culture, are deeply rooted in our history, and not only in our history, but in the history of a whole Europe. And at the same time, where the modern state, where the modern society, where the modern people who can show it in modern way. Yeah. So these two tasks are deeply interconnected. Yeah. On the one hand, to show that we are fighting against the absolutely form of evil, the Russian Empire, and it's not only our enemy, but it is enemy of the whole free world, and that this type of political system, this type of crime is deeply rooted in the Russian history and Russian culture. And on the other hand, we should show our own style of life, our own style of culture. We should show it in modern way, but we should show at the same time that this modern way, this modern type of culture is deeply rooted in our tradition and the tradition of Europe and of our civilization.
Just to the second part, a couple of difficult questions. You're talking about finding this language, the affinity of Ukraine with and towards Europe and vice versa. So, as I was breastfed as a Swede with the idea of Sweden being this third alternative between two evil forces, as I said before, things have changed, and I would agree with you with this free world and so on. Since the mid-90s, Sweden is a member of the European Union. And the self-image of Sweden in the European Union and of the European Union and of the European integration project, of the whole European political project, is that we live in post-national times and in a post-heroic age. These are kind of two pillars of this European idea of political and social democratic integration. That the EU is sui generis new example of the future, so to say, post-nationalist and post-heroic. Two key elements in the narrative and in the quest of Ukraine now is heroism and nationalism. How can one find the language to explain? This is one of the main difficulties I have when I'm talking to friends and colleagues and whatever, to address these two issues, because they are so crucial to the European project. And what we're seeing here is something else. The David and Goliath story is a heroic story, right? There are different types of heroisms, of course, as well. And the need to break away from a colonial joke, if you want to phrase it like that, or serfdom, or slavery, or being integrated somewhere where you don't belong, is about forming a national community. And how so my question is very difficult, but how can it be done? Do you think it can be done?
That is the point. How we can translate, from English to English. I mean, it's not a translation from one language to another language, but it's translation from one culture to another one. And as for me, I would like to live in a post-heroic and post-nationalist world. But during the war, it's almost impossible. That is our great problem. And for example, we can explain this in this way also. It's an idea of my friend Volodymyr Yermolenko. Oksana mentioned him. He said that in modern Ukraine, To be liberal, it means to be patriotic. And to be patriotic, it means to be liberal. Yeah? It's strange for the people in Europe, but it's only one way to us to live now during this hot war. So how to explain it? It's very complicated, as I said, but we should find the way to explain it. Probably the best way to explain it for the European people is to show it. Because the people who come to Ukraine, who see the crimes of Russian soldiers, not the crime of Putin, the crimes of normal Russian people who came to us to kill us. It's a way to tell it, not to tell but to show. Yeah? And probably I invite all people to Ukraine. I think I understand that it's dangerous, but it's very hard but a very important experience for all people all over the world, I think. Yeah.
And I will again coming back to our realities, to the triennial. I would also put you back to not only war but also Ukrainian culture. There is exhibition here in Kaunas. It's a bit more difficult to organize exhibition and festivals and everything in Ukraine right now, but how can we present Ukrainian culture in this new context to be relevant also after the war? Because, well, I believe it will be after the war sooner or later. How can we avoid the situation Carl Henrik mentioned before, when a person, an artist, a writer from a country which is in war can present themselves as just another good writer, just another good artist?
I would say I don't know. The war, it's very terrible experience. And for example, I don't know what I will write after the war. Yeah? So it's a very complicated question. But it's also answer on your question, because how to tell the people from the countries of Europe, even here in Lithuanian, about the war. Yeah? The narration, our texts, our narrations are not enough, and their art, you know, painting, films, videos are very important. Yeah? But the great and the very important question for us also, what should we do after the war? Yeah, the war changed us. Yeah? But we should think now about our tasks after the war. And it's a pity, but I don't have any answer on this question, because now our main task is victory, because it's without victory we can't have any future in this war, because we understand that this war not about, as I said, not about the territory, but that this war is about our existence. That's why it's too complicated for us now to think about the peace in the world about after the war. Yeah. It's very complicated, not only for philosophers, but also for artists, for soldiers, for politicians, yeah, for all people in Ukraine.
Kalyan, maybe you have an answer for that, because I'm naive. I'm still believe that outsiders have good answers when we don't have answers.
No, of course, there's no concrete answer to that, but there is a principal answer to it, and that is a post-war, an answer to a post-war question, but just as much to a pre-war question. And that means that you have what I try to describe with Eurozine, this network of intellectual exchange, was built on not creating ghettos. For example, you have Eastern European literature here, and you have Western European literature here, just as one example. And this is very, very often created, and also for very, very good, there are good intentions behind this, as a supporting cultural initiatives that is presenting this or that. But the whole idea with the Eurozine network, when I worked with it back then, and it still is that this is an integrated community where there is eye level. For example, I initiated a series of literary criticism, which was called Literary Perspectives, where you had a writer from, or a review of contemporary Ukrainian literature or Estonian literature next to or mixed in with a text on French literature or on German literature. And there were no difference in the importance of these. They were just part of the same circulation, of the same discussion. And that is, so to say, the pre-war and the post-war attitude, so that you don't come into a situation like the Swedish literary landscape now is in. We need to catch up with translating. What it's great that publishing houses and the whole community is catching up. That's very, very good. But the whole idea is that should not be necessary, because then but that says nothing about content or anything like that. But it is about the infrastructural setting of this whole this whole scene.
You said, so to say, about the form, about infrastructure, and I want to say only one sentence, probably about the content. Yeah, we should find something positive in this terrible situation. Yeah, and I used two keywords, freedom and dignity, but probably we need another key word. It's life. Yeah, so because our war against Russia, it's war against the Russian world of death. Yeah. And this word life, yeah, it's very important for all of us. It's the main value, not only for people but for the ears. Yeah, and it's a great question about the life after war. But we are fighting for this life, and probably it can be the main word for us, for all of us, not only in Ukraine but in the whole world.
I think at this point we could open the floor for question if there is any, but actually I don't think it is. So I think I would thank both of you. That was Vahtank Kubuladze, who is a philosopher and translator and writer, prominent writer from Kiev, and Carl Henrik Fredriksson, who came from Vienna, so that's Sweden and Vienna again. Great editor and translator. I would also thank you, our partners in Kaunas, our hosts, the Office of European Capital of Culture, and the last but not the least, the organization that made exactly this discussion happening is International Renaissance Foundation office in Kiev. Thank you very much. And I also invite everyone here in Kaunas and our online audience for tomorrow discussions with Yaroslava Stricha. She already here in Kaunas. She came from Ukraine, and Jacek Denel, I guess on his way from Poland. So again, thank you very much, and join us tomorrow.